The Wright brothers' first successful powered flight went almost unnoticed throughout the world. Only one newspaper published an account of the flight, and it was poorly written and misleading. The Wright brothers issued a public statement to the Associated Press. Unfortunately, the statement was either ignored or hidden deep inside the papers. In October 1905, they made a flight which lasted 38 minutes and covered 24 miles. It ended when their fuel supply ran out. In 1905, the Wright brothers wrote a letter to the United States government and offered to build aircraft that would meet the government needs. However, the War Department, being embarrassed before, didn't want to try this again. However, Theodore Roosevelt became president of the United States in 1904 and directed the Secretary of War to look into the possibility of testing Wright's new flying machines. This set in motion the contracting process with the War Department. With Wilbur Wright's help, the department drafted a public request for bids for an aircraft that can do 7 things. Had to carry a pilot, a passenger, and have fuel for a 125-mile trip. It also had to fly at least 36 miles per hour under perfect control and take off and land in any likely war zone without damage. Lastly, it had to be disassembled for transport by wagon and reassembled in 1 hour. In addition, the contract called for the Wrights to train 2 pilots for the Army. This public request for bids was merely a red tape formality. The Wrights were the only people with the knowledge to build such a craft at that time, and now they were in business. As Orville got busy building a new plane for the Army tests, Wilbur went to France. There he demonstrated the Wright brothers' flying machine for the European governments. These demonstrations result in Wilbur signing a $100,000 contract to form the French Aircraft Building Company. In September, Orville began his tests at Fort Myers, Virginia. His first flight took official Washington by storm. During the next 2 weeks, Orville completed 11 more flights. Each flight was more successful than the last. Then tragedy struck on the 13th test. While conducting a test carrying Army Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge as a passenger, a propeller broke and the airplane crashed. Lieutenant Selfridge was killed. He was the first man to lose his life in a powered aircraft. Orville was seriously hurt in the crash, later recovered and completed the tests. On August 2, 1909, the Army bought its first aircraft from the Wright brothers at a cost of $25,000 plus a $5,000 bonus because the aircraft exceeded the speed requirements. This was the Army's first heavier-than-air flying machine. There was also some other aviation gains to be recognized. A couple that are not listed here is Glenn Curtiss, who was known for building motorcycle engines that were light and powerful, and also known as the fastest man on earth, started building aircraft engines, and he also started making other flying machines. Curtiss and Alexander Graham Bell founded an organization called the Aerial Experiment Association that designed and built several aircraft. One of them was to be the first aircraft fit with ailerons. These are small flaps on the wing that control the airplane. Another one was also the first seaplane to be flown in the United States. This is a plane that landed and takes off from water. In 1911, William Randolph Hearst, publisher of the Hearst newspapers, offered a prize of $50,000 for a flight across the United States completed in 30 days. Galbraith Perry Rogers, a grandnephew of Commodore Oliver H. Perry, decided to try for the prize. Rogers persuaded a company that made a popular soft drink called FinFizz to sponsor and help pay for the attempt. The company thought it would make great publicity value for FinFizz and agreed to pay for the Wright plane. Rogers named the plane the FinFizz Flyer and had a specially trained team with spare parts. Rogers started from Sheep's Bay on Long Island in September 17, 1911. The sponsoring company helped plan the route, and it went roughly from New York to Chicago, Kansas City, San Antonio, El Paso, Yuma, and Pasadena, California. The plan covered more than 3,300 miles. Rogers had some problems with the route. For example, the small 40 horsepower engine would have problems getting over the huge Rocky Mountains. Rogers learned that there were only a few places where he could fly across the Rockies. Rogers took off from Long Island and flew day after day. Some days he had trouble making 40 miles because of the headwind. Before the trip ended, he had made 68 landings, some of them severe crack-ups. His plane had to be repaired so many times that the only original parts that lasted the entire trip were the rudder and one strut. Rogers actually flew for more than 4,200 miles. His longest single flight was 133 miles, and his average speed was under 52 miles. After reaching Pasadena on November 5th, he flew on to the ocean where he rolled his plane along the beach and wet the wheels in the Pacific. Unfortunately, he missed the prize because the trip had taken 49 days. An automobile or a train would have made much better time. However, Rogers made it. He made the first airplane crossing of the United States from coast to coast. During this same time, American women entered the field of flying, and it was during the Belmont Park Aviation Meet in October 1910 that a young woman writer, Harriet Quimby, became interested in aviation. She signed up for flying lessons with instructor Alfred Moissant, and in August 1911, Harriet Quimby became the first licensed female pilot. She also became a member of the Moissant International Aviators, an organization designed to advance the science of aviation. On April 16, 1912, Harriet Quimby took off from the English coast into a cold, foggy sky and landed about 30 minutes later in Harriet, France. With this flight, she became the first woman to fly solo across the English Channel. Unfortunately, in June of 1912, she died when she was flying with a passenger at the Harvard-Boston Aviation Meet. Harriet Quimby lost control of Blériot monoplane where both she and her passengers fell to their death. Many aviation pioneers already mentioned, such as Roger Bacon, Leonardo da Vinci, and George Cayley, experimented with helicopters. None of them, however, went any further than building flying models. But it was these models that validated the rotary wing concept. In 1842, W.H. Phillips built and successfully flew a model helicopter powered by steam jets at the rotary tips. The first helicopter to lift a man in the air was flown in 1907. This machine was built and flown by a Frenchman named Louis Breguet. Though it lifted him, it was held steady by 4 assistants. In that same year, another Frenchman, Paul Cornu, also flew a helicopter. In 1909, a father and son, Emile and Henry Berliner, became the first Americans to build and fly a helicopter. All these early experiments were plagued by problems of controlling the helicopter while in flight. Major control problem to be overcome was counteracting the torque of the rotor blade. When the rotor of a helicopter is turning, the rest of the machine needs to spin the opposite direction. One way of overcoming the torque is to have 2 rotors that rotate in opposite directions. Another is to provide a small propeller at the end of a long tail boom or a tail rotor which provides thrust to counteract the torque of the main rotor. This problem would haunt designers for more than 30 years before being solved. On January 1st, 1914, the world's first regularly scheduled airline service using heavier than aircraft was started in the United States. This airline was called the St. Petersburg to Tampa Airboat Line. It was flown by Tony Janis in a twin-engine Benoist 14 or X-1V flying boat which carried 2 passengers. 22-mile flight cost Tampa Bay $5 and it took 20 minutes. The airline flew the route twice a day for about 4 months, carried 1,200 passengers.